So, of course, this weekend in Buffalo, there was the really, really horrific incident of the mass shooting that took place at the, I believe it was the Tops grocery store, where this 18-year-old, like, right-wing gunman went in and murdered 10 people. And if one of these people, there's been a string of these incidents, and there hasn't been one for a while. I imagine the pandemic had a little bit to do with that, slowing down this like stream of right-wing attacks, vigilante attacks. But of course, he's someone that was very much radicalized by these like online right-wing communities. He left this detailed manifesto about his beliefs. And he's another one of these like right-wing weirdos who is obsessed with white birth rates and the Great Replacement theory and all these kind of right-wing conspiracy theories. Who, of course, has to take out his fucking aggression on a bunch of innocent people that are out there trying to buy groceries. You know, the least harmless people. I mean, the thing that's so sickening, I think, about this incident, but I think all right-wing ideology in a way, but like this incident is like really an example of this. It's evil, and it's just like, it's so coward. These people are so fucking cowardly. These people who I think somewhat, like, you understand why any young person right now.
Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
There's going to be a cascading wave of this that's going to get worse over the next few years. I can't wait for American Azov paramilitary units. Yeah. I wonder if there's going to be any blowback from this. We're going to get to this. Thank you, Clueless, for the raid. Welcome, Clueless. Thank you for the raid. I hope you had a good time on your little girl's trip with the other friend of the stream, Marina. I hope you had fun. Thanks for the raid. But it's cowardly because, like, I think if you're 18 years old, no matter what socioeconomic bracket you belong to, I think it's normal to feel this sense of like alienation, right? It's normal to feel like there's powerful people that are taking away your future from you. That's a very real phenomenon. And I think the fucking disgusting thing about these like these radicalized right-wing terrorists is that they've taken these feelings of alienation, and rather than take any of that anger that inspires and actually turn it towards the powerful people in society that are, you know, that are destroying your future. Oil company CEOs, the military industrial complex, powerful people. And rather than do anything to actually go after these powerful people and these powerful forces that are wielding such control over our society and that have in fact stolen everyone's futures from us, they turn this anger on the people least responsible for that, who are literally defenseless. Because going after powerful people, of course, powerful political figures, powerful like CEOs, wealthy people that do have this immense amount of control over our society, that's hard. These people have like security, they have armed security, they have the power of the police and the state working for them, of course. So going after them is really difficult and dangerous. What's not dangerous, though, is to attack a bunch of innocent people buying groceries who have contributed nothing to these problems that you've developed, these problems that you're talking about. It's so pathetic, these people that just upset with all the things going wrong in society. They're become so fixated and obsessed on white birth rates. And rather than taking that extremely foolish concern with everything going on, you're concerned about white birth rates. You know what? If you're actually that concerned about white birth rates, what you should do is go and get a girlfriend and start a family. Why don't you do that if you're so concerned about white birth rates? But instead what they do is they go and buy assault weapons, and they carry the assault weapons into grocery stores, Walmarts, mosques, synagogues, and take out this aggression that they have on the people least responsible for this, who are completely defenseless, completely unarmed, who are civilians. They're not soldiers. It's absolutely, it's so sick and evil, and it's pathetic that these right-wing people take out this anger they have on the people that they have done the least to actually deserve it, and who can't defend themselves. We're talking about middle-aged people at the fucking grocery store. I choose to get mad at 5 Afghan refugees moving to my state who might vote for a Democrat, possibly. And of course, like, that's in the wake of this incident, it's become, this discourse has come around once again about how this conspiracy theory about the Great Replacement and about these declining white birth rates. You realize that this is not some like niche conspiracy in these like radicalized online communities. This is like a very popular mainstream belief, which is repeated night after night by elected officials, by powerful media celebrities like Tucker Carlson. The beliefs that are motivating these people are extremely mainstream on the right. And why we can point that out, one thing I also think we should point out, yes, the right openly engages in this kind of rhetoric about white birth rates and replacement and Democrats smuggling immigrants into the country to replace the white race and to vote for Democrats. Yes, all this is true. Fundamentally, though, when you look at the immigration policies of Democrats, they might use different rhetoric, but ultimately they're part of that exact same process of deporting millions of people, predominantly black and brown people, and putting them in the concentration camps, sending them back to destabilized countries, which they've destabilized with their own political actions. So Democrats and liberals they don't have clean hands on this either, because they're part of this process of dehumanizing immigrants, even if they might use like rhetoric sometimes that suggests that they support these things. They don't actually support increasing immigration. They don't actually support giving rights to these people, to refugees, to immigrants, or any of this stuff. They agree with the same framework that these people are criminals that need to be kicked out of the country. And that's exactly how they act when they actually have power. Do not come. There you go. Yeah, do not come. So, well, I think we should point out the ways that this is completely mainstream on the right. I don't think anyone should let liberals or Democrats off the hook either for the ways that they've contributed to this dehumanization of people, which leads to these really horrific incidents. But to talk about how it is popular on the right, obviously Tucker Carlson is at the center of that, center of that criticism. Let's see a clip. This is the most watched media figure in America.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it. That's true. Let's say that again for emphasis.
It is not true, first of all, but okay. Or sickos like Matt Iglesias suggesting we pump out 1 billion babies to compete, giving way to that same replacement theory shit. Or Matt Iglesias, who this weekend is like, look at these Nordic countries where the left is making gains by throwing immigrants under the bus. Maybe we should be doing the same thing. We should be talking about this stuff as well so we get right-wing votes. The same fucking thing. I think liberals are very happy with fascism as long as they don't have to do any of the dirty work themselves. They can just enable it elsewhere and then disavow it when it hits their own backyard. Yeah, well, and that's the weird doublethink that's happening with liberals right now, Lana, right? Is that they see incidents like this and they're like, I'm against this. This is horrible. This is fascism. This is right-wing violence, and we need to do something about this. But then when their own government is like, hey, we want to send $40 billion worth of weapons to people that literally believe in all the same stuff. And these liberals say, yes, yeah, good, because Putin bad. So let's definitely do that. Let's definitely transfer as many weapons as we can to these right-wing militias in Europe and not ask any questions about who's on the other side of these massive weapons transfers. I hate Tucker and it's easy to blame him, but this is deep inside American culture. Yeah, and I want to be able to talk about the role Carlson plays in outlining these ideas without suggesting that this is a uniquely right-wing thing or that this is not just part of American culture in general.
Emphasis because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up. I mean, they're trying to change the population of the United States. And they hate it when you say that because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world. Let me just state unequivocally, the country's being stolen from American citizens as we watch. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
Yeah, we've invaded this country. I mean, that's the fundamental fucking joke about all this stuff. Like, I was looking at this kid's manifesto and reading some of the things of it, and it's just the fucking gall that these people have to talk about we need to, like, defend our people's lands from this invasion. We need to defend our people's homelands from this invasion, using this kind of blood and soil rhetoric. Motherfucker, these are not your people's homelands. You just got here. You got here probably 3-4 generations ago, max. And you're talking about your homelands and this stuff. We must defend our people's homelands. Go back to, like, wherever you came from and yell at them about it. They're still on Turner Diary shit. Again, it's preposterous. And you're literally targeting black people who were brought to the United States predominantly against their will as part of the transatlantic slave trade, who have probably in many cases been in America longer than these right-wing racists, and they're literally going to a grocery store to kill black Americans because they view them as being some kind of interlopers or invading the country, replacing people on their homelands. And it's not your fucking homeland. Aren't immigrants more likely to vote conservative? I know second generation is almost all liberal, but I think conservative immigrants are a well-established statistical group. I mean, our whole immigration policy in Canada and the United States has been to deliberately target conservative communities for that exact reason and give priority to these immigrants over immigrants that are going to have, like, leanings towards socialism at the left. Like, if you're a member of a communist party in the country where you live, you can't immigrate to the United States. They'll just say no, because you're not allowed to do that. But yeah, that's the really sick thing. They're so concerned about replacing my people's homelands. And it's like, okay, this is something good to look at. Let me just get this off the screen. The reason I think this is, like, the reason I was really, like, alarmed by this incident that happened is because when I started really making more of an effort to pay attention to, you know, the rise of fascism and start to commenting on this stuff more, you know, at the beginning of the Trump administration, this is a phenomenon that is, like, I've been tracking pretty closely enough for now a couple years precisely because in, like, the first few weeks of the Trump administration, there was one of the first such incidents in the last couple of years when this kid shot up a mosque in Quebec City shortly after Trump was elected. And I do think it's important to talk about the ways that liberals and conservatives kind of share a lot of the same ideology. And I don't think it's valuable to just, be like a exclusively orange man bad person or talk about Trump fascism. I don't think there's any question though that Trump really did pour gasoline on this kind of this already existing phenomenon and gave people sort of allowed people to sort of express these kinds of things that maybe they weren't comfortable expressing before, or gave a kind of legitimacy to these like explicit anti-immigrant, explicitly racist kind of beliefs. I don't think there should be any questioning of that. I think he absolutely did really contribute to that, to the uptick in that kind of rhetoric and that kind of activity. So a few weeks into Trump's agenda, there's this mosque shooting in Quebec City. So this is something that's, for that reason, I think is something that I've been very clued in on this entire time. And following these similar incidents throughout the Trump administration. Because this is not, this kid in Buffalo, Quebec, and these are not isolated incidents. This is a like coherent international movement, an international right-wing movement that is carrying out these kinds of attacks on civilians. It's not just in America, it's in Quebec. You can go back prior to that. I mean, I think the first such incident that I could probably start at is talking about the Breivik killings in Oslo. Anders Breivik going on that mass murder campaign in Oslo and taking all these going after all these young socialists. You have the kid in South Carolina. Was it Charleston? In the later days of the Obama administration, opening fire in the church there. You had Quebec City right after Trump was elected. While Trump was in power, you had multiple attacks. Like, this is an increasing phenomenon. Dylan Roof, yeah. He stoked the flames, but the underlying currents were already there. You had the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, the attack there. You had the attack on the Walmart in El Paso. You had Christchurch in New Zealand, the absolutely horrific attack. Also, and these are all connected with one another, right? All these incidents are connected. It's ideologically coherent. All these killers are like inspiring one another. And there's this whole online community of right-wing sympathizers that treat these people as heroes. And there's this whole community now where, everyone understands implicitly that they can become this kind of right-wing martyr if they commit the same kind of atrocity. And it does go back even further. It goes back to Oklahoma City. Definitely. I mean, even the Parkland school shooting was done by like a MAGA teenager. You can decide whether that fits into this like pattern of killings. That wasn't attacking, racialized people or immigrants, but was attacking probably maybe, what the kid who carried out the shooting viewed as like his political enemies, young Democrats and this kind of stuff. So it's a really alarming phenomenon. This is like a international movement. It's highly organized. It's now multiple, and there's probably other smaller incidents that haven't gotten the same amount of media attention, but now multiple violent incidents of attacks on predominantly, Jewish people in the Tree of Life synagogue, Muslims in Quebec City and Christchurch, racialized people and immigrants in El Paso and Buffalo. These are all linked together, and all leaving these similar manifestos that reference this kind of like demographic replacement. And obviously these manifestos are confused and rambling. People get always tripped up by things in this, and like they'll leave some reference to kind of left-wing ideology that allows people to kind of like pretend that they're not right-wing at all. When you're like when you're literally a racist who's attacking, black and brown people because you're worried about the future of the right race. You're a far right racist, regardless of what language you've used in this kind of in this manifesto that you've left. Jesus Christ, Doc. Yeah, I always go back to the OKC bombing. My mom was a survivor. I was almost put in that daycare in the Murrah building because it was right next to my mom's office. And the OKC bombing is a really good example of this as well, because I think all of the political motivations of that were completely swept under the rug, right? The fact that I didn't even know for years, because this happened when I was pretty young, I didn't even know for years that McVeigh was one of these like right-wing militia types who believed in all the same stuff. That his political motivations for the OKC bombing got completely whitewashed and ignored in a way that's becoming a little bit more difficult to do now in the online world. At this point, I don't care anymore. More than enough chances to enact gun control and reopen mental health services in the last 30 fucking years. Well, and this is also the problem though too, is that when these incidents happen, and it was happening again after Buffalo, it's the guns. We got to do something about the guns. And the reality is, like, yeah, I think it is too easy to get like deadly weapons, but it's not just about guns though. It isn't. It's an ideology problem, which has been allowed to fester. There's a big multi-billion-dollar right-wing media establishment that spreads these exact theories that radicalizes these people. One thing I must admit I did not realize, and I covered the Christchurch shooting like pretty extensively, like in podcasting, and I talked about it a lot and thought about it a lot. One thing I didn't realize, I did not know this, or I'd forgotten about it. I remember there was stuff about the Christchurch shooter who had been elsewhere. I remember he was in I think he might have been gone to North Korea or something. People tried to make something about that. What I did not realize, though, was that the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand was inspired and trained by the Ukrainian fascist movement. I don't remember hearing much about that. It's not just guns and ideology, material conditions need to be addressed. That is true to an extent, but also you see a lot of these right-wing killers are coming from affluent backgrounds though. It's not their material conditions that are leading them down this path of hate and murder and violence. Like I said, there's plenty of things for people to be really radicalized about when it comes to young people, no matter what your economic background is. But look, if you talk about Azov, you're just supporting Putin. That's it. Well, that's the thing. I did not realize that the Christchurch shooter had actually gone to Ukraine to train with Azov Battalion. This is from January 7th, 21. After the worst such attack in recent years, this was, of course, being shared in the media before the invasion of Ukraine, when they were actually talking about this kind of stuff. After the worst such attack in recent years, the massacre of 51 people in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019, an arm of the Azov movement helped distribute the terrorist raving manifesto in print and online, seeking to glorify his crimes and inspire others to follow. In the 16 years that followed the attacks of 9/11, far-right groups were responsible for nearly 3/4 of the 85 deadly extremist incidents that took place on American soil. The following year, it became clear that those changes were not enough. The Christchurch mosque attacker, who live-streamed the atrocity on Facebook, had been radicalized by far-right material largely on YouTube and Facebook, according to a New Zealand government report released in December 2020. He had spent time in Ukraine in 2015 He had spent time in Ukraine in 2015 and mentioned plans to move to the country permanently. Which is, right around the time that John McCain and Lindsey Graham were visiting to tell these Ukrainian militias that they would be getting any resources that they needed to take the fight to the Russians. It's maddening because we all said that this would happen. We all said fueling these Nazis overseas would give inspiration to homegrown fascists. We were proven right within a couple months. Yet if you go to the peanut gallery, they're dismissing this obvious Russian propaganda. Yeah. We know that when he was in that part of the world, he was making contact with far-right groups. Says Andrew Little, the minister responsible for the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. Little says he does not know if those groups included Azov, but during the attack, the shooter wore a flak jacket bearing a black sun, the symbol commonly used by the Azov battalion. And you saw this black sun as well the Sonnenrad, in the manifesto left by this killer in Buffalo. And a lot of people have been kind of bending themselves into ideological pretzels to be like, well, what does Azov have to do with this thing in Buffalo? Just because it's the same symbol, doesn't mean that they're connected in any way, or that there's any connection to Ukraine. And I think it is actually very, very relevant to talk about the ways that this global far-right movement is connected. And the way that their ideology is connected, and the way they're all informing each other and being inspired by each other. I already saw people racing to deny the connection. That was the first thing that people were doing. That's the first thing people were doing. And I'm sorry, but I don't think it is a coincidence. Or if it's not a coincidence, it's something that everybody should be really alarmed by, the way that this very symbol, the Sonnenrad, has become normalized in every single Western mainstream media establishment that has been talking about these Ukrainian militias, that has been running these propaganda stories about the brave Ukrainian nationalists defending their country. How many of them have shown this symbol, including NATO itself? NATO itself has done this. So if you don't find that alarming, that we have been arming and funding and training these groups in Ukraine, that we're continuing to support them diplomatically and militarily as they engage in this conflict with the Russians, and we're seeing this same symbol pop up in domestic terrorist attacks in our own countries. If you don't think that's alarming, I don't know what to tell you. I do not know what to tell you. I live near, sorry, feminist critique, I've been meaning to get to your comment. I live near Charleston, South Carolina, and when the Charleston church shooting happened, the powers that be washed away the white supremacist ties of Dylann Roof and astroturfed it into being just a lone wolf. Despite the waving of the Confederate flag, his association with reading white supremacist online material, watching white supremacist YouTube channels, it's been ramping up for years and years. There's a lot of these right-wing lone wolf guys, isn't there? Isn't that interesting? There's quite a few of these right-wing lone wolves. How many fucking lone wolves are there out there? Turns out there's a couple dozen at least, and probably more coming on the horizon. And as we know, if anyone if there was people, a bunch of lone wolf assassins going into police headquarters, for example, and carrying out mass shootings independently of one another, killing dozens and dozens of people over several years, and posting manifestos referencing Black Lives Matter, referencing Antifa or any one of these things, would they be portrayed as lone wolves by the media, by the political class? Of course, we all know that they would not. Again, all these attacks are all linked together. This is like a highly organized global movement that is carrying out these attacks. Stealing this is partially related when it comes to shooter manifestos and the way, like Feminist Critique mentioned, they get painted as a lone wolf. I've sincerely come to the opinion that liberals push the "don't give it any oxygen" line because of how embarrassing the proximity of their anti-communism is to the anti-communism of fascists. That's a good point, Outrun. And that's the thing. There was a number of people in the wake of this attack immediately being like, don't talk about this. Don't talk about the manifesto. Don't share any of the images. Don't share any of the symbols. Leave it to like the disinformation experts to really look at this. And yeah, I think we do need to examine why that's the first instinct people have. I don't know if the idea that like, oh, if you share segments of this shooter's manifesto, you're going to get it, you're going to radicalize more people. No, the people we're sharing, like, they're already getting it, right? The people that have the propensity to be radicalized by this, they're all sharing it already. They're all reading it and sharing it and talking about it and commenting on it already. Nothing that we are going to do is going to contribute to that in any way. They are already doing that. The people that want to hear this, see these manifestos, they see them already. We're not contributing to that in any way when we share these things or we start to ask questions about how these things are connected. You know, that's preposterous. And I get a little alarmed when I see these like think tank backed disinformation experts start to like lecture people about who's allowed to comment on this stuff and who isn't. Not to play devil's advocate, because I agree re-Ukraine nationalist militias, but I've seen articles, threads reframing these symbols and militias and trying to demonstrate how we're wrong to think they're Nazis and they mean something different in Ukraine. My first thought is propaganda. It also makes me doubt and feel like I don't really grasp the situation. No, the thing is, that's crab-iled. That's gaslighting, right? You do grasp it. You're correct to be concerned about that. That feeling of feeling crazy, that's the result of being living inside this like media bubble that immediately discounts these things while you make the obvious, logical, normal connection that this is a white supremacist symbol and that it means the same thing for these Ukrainian militias as it does for these like radicalized mass shooters in the United States. You're absolutely correct to make that link. And that feeling of feeling crazy, that's the result of this relentless media campaign to normalize these things. Your instincts are 100% correct. And like I said, it should be really alarming to everyone when you literally have NATO, right? Not some random, they deleted the tweet, not some random institution, but NATO, in the institution in question here, sharing images on International Women's Day of a female soldier with the exact symbol. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the proper tweet. It's been kind of blurred out in this. Yeah, you couldn't really see it in the previous image. Jesus. Yeah, there it is. And this is not just, it's like literally NATO that's sharing this, but there's been this like endless stream of Western media outlets over the last 2 months sharing images of Ukrainian militia members with these symbols. honestly a big reason why this community has been so useful. Most of what is passed off as reality makes me feel like I'm insane. I agree. Yeah. I'm strongly considering moving to Hanoi. That would be cool if you did that. Not fair, Rob. NATO deleted this tweet after they realized they simply can't take pics of Ukrainian soldiers without a couple of Nazi insignias popping up somewhere. Or like we've seen as well, you talk about this normalization of the Sonnenrad or these other things like the UPA flag that gets waved at every single pro-Ukrainian protest for the Ukrainian insurgent army, which carried out horrific atrocities during World War II against Jews and Polish people, which is another thing that's been completely normalized in this process. I saw the article in the Telegraph yesterday about Azovstal wives and once again felt the gaslighting. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, how many more incidents of this does there have to be? And this is, I've examined all of these things endlessly, like on the show, right? I've examined these things endlessly. This was in like the Twitter trending, like for you, that's TikTok, but if you click on like your trending things, this piece came up from the Telegraph. As the fighters hold out in Mariupol steelworks besieged by Russian forces, we talked to the Azov wives trying to secure their freedom. The Azov wives trying to secure their freedom. And that's the question too. It's like, does this just like mean something different? Does this just mean something different in other cultures? Do we just not get this? Are we West-splaining? Are we West-splaining when we question about these symbols? I don't think we are. You can't find the enhanced tweet that incrementally zooms in closer and closer to the Black Sun badge because the OP lost their account. Well, that's because our hard-working disinformation experts are hard at work ensuring that anyone else that's pointing this out is ensuring this kind of devious Russian propaganda is immediately removed from social media. I have actual socialists telling me they were freedom fighters fighting against their Soviet oppressors for self-determination. Motherfucker, how much of a rube do you want to be? Like the things we've been talking about today, Sam, it's like this should not be that difficult. It should not be that hard to ask. But this is the question, is if you're alarmed by this trend of right-wing violence, you know, and there's a direct link from Oslo to Charleston to Quebec City to Pittsburgh to El Paso to Buffalo, and again, I'm probably leaving some out. If you're alarmed by this kind of thing, you should be even more alarmed by the way these fascist symbols and ideas have been normalized in our mainstream media over the last couple of months, and you should be really, really alarmed at who is on the other side of these massive weapons transfers where we're sending billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons to these groups. And what do you think is going to happen years from now when this conflict is winding down? What do you think all these fascists that we've been arming and training now for years, because this didn't just start 6 weeks ago. We've been training these groups for years. What the fuck do you think is going to happen with all these weapons and training? Do you think they're just going to go on, be the brave Ukrainian defenders and be the obedient NATO soldiers to fight the Russians? No, this is going to lead to blowback, and we're going to get more incidents, just like we saw this weekend in Buffalo. All these people are going to be going back to their own communities with their new sense of like weapons and training that they've been doing, that they've been engaging in, just like the Christchurch shooter. And they're going to carry out more terrorist attacks against civilians in our own communities. Luckily, none of the groups we've armed and empowered in the past have had blowback. That's right. Trying to get to the chat's really popping off. I'm trying to get to all of it. Also, what's so annoying here is that the original Nazis also pretended their dumb fucking symbols and gestures were just historical tradition. They famously did this with the Heil and with the swastika. There's a good Ugopnik video about this called The Aesthetics of Fascism. It's just a repetition of OG Nazism. I'm going insane. Yes. Me too. Me too. That's the feeling you get when you are ensconced in this environment, this media environment. Thought I saw Lauren Southern for a second. No, but Lauren Southern is someone who has propagated this exact conspiracy theory, who has been allowed to do this on social media, and has been rehabilitated in the last couple of months, including by apparently well-intentioned people on the left who have agreed to like debate this fucking freak and ensure that she has more of a platform. And I'm sorry, I don't feel too much sympathy now for these people when they start talking about how Lauren Southern has expressed these dangerous ideas that are leading to these solutions. Well, don't fucking platform her on your Twitch channel then, I would say, would be my response to that. No matter how much of a good thing you think you're doing, you're only contributing to allowing this person to rehabilitate her image. Especially in a debate that you lost also. And if you point out any of this stuff, you're accused of shitting on the plight of Ukrainian people. It has to be black or white for the discourse and feels impossible to hold these two things, that the Russian attacks are horrible, but also that it's very worrying that we're arming Nazis. Yes. Yes. And like whenever we've talked about this stuff, this reality of how we've been arming and training and funding these groups for years now, and I've talked about the legitimate security concerns that Russia has, and again, that's another thing that's upsetting to people, but any other country would find their neighbor being armed and trained by these Western military alliance, which was specifically created to destroy your country. Any other country would find that to be a legitimate a security threat. That doesn't mean that an invasion is right, or that, wars aren't terrible, or that horrible things aren't happening as a result of this invasion. But we can't just pretend that none of this stuff is happening. The lib internet sleuths combed through every utterance of the Trump administration to find secret messages to fascists, yet they can't seem to notice the proudly displayed patches on these brave freedom fighters they keep gushing about. Yeah. And it's a good thing no leftist streamers platform Lauren said, what? I'm getting an update from my producer. Sorry. Here's think about how I'm going to talk about this. I tweet about Christchurch again. That's not that. But when you think about, okay, okay, let me try to think how I'm going to talk about this. If you don't mind, for just a few minutes, I'm going to put on my conspiracy theory hat. Okay? I don't have any tinfoil around me. So I can't do it for real. I'm going to put on my conspiracy theory hat for just a moment. And so, first and foremost, I think anytime one of these mass shooting incidents happen, this is like an Occam's razor thing, okay? The simplest explanation is that it's happening in a depraved culture where it's too easy to get deadly weapons. People are saturated in this right-wing ideology, and they're being radicalized by God knows who online and carrying out these attacks. That's the simplest explanation, and that's predominantly what I believe is going on here. What started making gears turning, though, a little bit is, okay, so you talk about Azov and Ukraine, okay? And the fact that Azov And these, like, Azov is just one example of this far right element within the Ukrainian military establishment that's been armed and trained by the West. And that's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. You know, in the Ottawa Citizen, what is it, David Pugliese, tanky journalist David Pugliese has reported extensively on the Canadian government training these neo-Nazi militias. And we know as well that the CIA and the national security establishment and the intelligence community has been arming and training these groups in Ukraine for several years now, right? That's not a conspiracy, that's a reality. So you have the CIA arming and training neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine. You have the Christchurch mass shooter going to Ukraine to be trained by these same people. And then you have the Christchurch mass shooter carrying out this horrible atrocity in his own community. And then you have other mass shooters, like this Buffalo mass shooter, who are directly inspired by that mass killing. And there is not a lot of degrees of separation there between the CIA and these mass shooters in New Zealand and the United States. And you know, what have CIA death squads been responsible for throughout the last couple of decades? You know, we can read the CIA's organized crime, like Old Dutch has been saying. We can read Jakarta Method. We can read Against Empire. We can read Washington Bullets. For concrete, explicit examples of what these CIA-trained death squads have been doing in El Salvador, in Nicaragua. Domestic Gladio isn't very tinfoil. I mean, it's a little bit. It's a little bit. But I think there's a link there. Whether you like it or not, there's a link there. When you have the Christchurch mass shooter being trained by Azov, who are trained by Western security forces and the CIA and NATO. And what are these death squads? What are they trained to do? Well, what have they done in the past? Carried out horrific, brutal attacks on civilians. That's like what that's one of the primary things that these groups are known for, in order to terrorize local populations. Stephen Paddock is a part of this Bristol board red string thing as well. Absolutely. We still don't even have any idea why Paddock carried out the attack that he did. Show me where the U.S. has systematically committed brutal violence against people, and I'll agree they're as bad as Russia. And a self-proclaimed foreign policy history buff, tell me. Unbelievable. So, but this is what I mean. Like, and we know also as well, we know that a lot of radical Islamic attacks, especially ones that were stopped by the FBI, were being deliberately instigated by these same people, right? They find these very lonely, alienated, Muslim men. They, over a period of time, deliberately radicalize them and get them to agree to carry out a terrorist attack, and then they stop it at the last minute and they say, "Whoa, congratulations! Like, you're welcome, everyone. The heroes came in the last minute and stopped it." I don't know if any of these incidents are part of some kind of Gladio operation, or whether it's connected to the intelligence community, but I do think it's worthwhile exploring this history and exploring whether there's any connections or any similarities. They usually stop it, or they don't in the case of the Boston Marathon, for example. So I think one of the mistakes of applying the CIA data to right-wing shooters is that it assumes some sort of intentional direction. I think the CIA has learned a lot about decentralized terror networks and are now just facilitating the useful ones, no direct contact required. I don't know if that makes sense. I'd been smoking and the tinfoil is too tight. Or 9/11, that's right, James. Well, no, like I said, River and Ravens too. I think the easiest solution when it comes to any of these like domestic right-wing terrorist attacks is the simplistic solution. Solution is the most likely solution. That these people are fucking depraved. It's a sick culture, a sick racist culture where people have too easy access to deadly weapons and they're carrying out these attacks. That's the simplest explanation. That's most likely what's happening. I was just, when I was thinking about the Christchurch shooter training under these Azov guys who we know have been armed and trained by the CIA, and thinking about the degrees of separation between these Western powers and these mass shooters in New Zealand and elsewhere, and thinking about the long history of CIA trained death squads carrying out brutal attacks against civilians. And I guess that's the thing. It's like we know that they've been doing this in other countries in the global south, you know, for decades and decades. And then I think sometimes we stop ourselves and say, but of course they would never do the same thing domestically. But it's like,
this is
they
some guy,
would,
Rob Russo,
they
some
would do
leftist
that.
based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Hey, TYT, thanks for the raid. Thank you for the raid, TYT. Thank you. I appreciate it. Welcome. I'm Rob. Smash the follow button if you can. Smash the subscribe button if you can. I'm just talking about this wave of right-wing terrorist attacks that have been going on for several years now. This, like, highly organized international movement of right-wing terrorists who share a very similar belief system, who have been carrying out really similar attacks, you know, from Oslo to Quebec City to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh to that Walmart shooting in El Paso to this weekend in Buffalo. This is like an ongoing series of violent pogroms, essentially, that are all influenced by one another. And examining how all these things are connected, and examining what, if any, links there are with Western intelligence community. I do like the elite rejoinder. It's not the CIA. We're merely a sick culture. No, we're not going to be addressing that either. No, we're not. The manifestos are kind of self-replicating at this point. I don't think intel agencies don't need to be involved much other than some FBI prodding. Well, that's another thing that I started thinking about when you get back to Tucker Carlson, right? Who's become a hero to these people. And like they were posting images of Tucker Carlson on 4chan immediately following this mass murder in Buffalo the other day, posting images of like Tucker Carlson in like right-wing militia gear, doing like Day of the Rope stuff. I was trying to find the image. And what's Tucker Carlson's background again? Is Tucker Carlson connected to the intelligence community somehow? It's kind of something that, and again, I'm wearing my tinfoil hat now, okay? I'm wearing my conspiracy hat to ask some of these questions. Tucker Carlson, though, famously got rejected by the CIA, who also hung out with the Contras in the early 80s as a young man. let me see if I can find. I'm trying to find that image of them that got posted on 4chan. It's really hard right now though because there's a lot of people talking about Tucker. Keep scrolling. Of course, you have this image of Tucker just from, 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago on the cover of the New York Times? When they're literally doing a story about, his role in all this kind of stuff, this kind of rhetoric. I'm trying to find the image that I saw of someone posted of Tucker Carlson on 4chan. Immediately after this, they're all like, going crazy about this stuff. Now let me just catch up with the chat here. As with self-described socialists in the West parroting State Department talking points, the CIA, etc., don't have to have an active role in organizing this stuff. They just plant the seeds, and people organically work their own way to the desired conclusion. This is kind of what I mean. When we talk about these things with this conspiracy about domestic gladio or anything, it's not necessarily the case, and I don't want anyone to think that that's like the impression that I'm giving, that you have like the CIA, handing sacks of money to people or like deliberately taking part in every step. But like they always, like you pointing out at Crad Babes, it's just like these planting these seeds and pushing people in these directions. And you got to wonder if there are people in the intelligence community that are involved in that. They've armed and trained and organized death squads to carry out horrific terrorist attacks against civilians in other countries in order to terrify the populations in other countries. And I don't think it's that much of a stretch to wonder whether they're engaging in the same kind of behavior here. Audio only thought you were free scrolling a chan. No, I was not doing that. I saw it on Telegram with the skull mask. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. And in fact, I thought of something else to look at, to talk about. It's one of the worst things about doing streaming is when a thought comes to your head and you're like, oh, that's a good point. You got to mention that right after this thing you talk about. And then you finish the thing that you're saying and then it goes away. It's gone. Just like that, it's gone. Oh no, okay, this is something that I wanted to, okay, here's what I wanted to say. Because like Glenn Greenwald and others, who of course Glenn immediately leaps to the defense of his friend Tucker. In this case. And one of the things that Glenn mentions as well, as does everyone whenever you bring up this like right-wing rhetoric inciting violence and stuff like that, they'll all bring up the congressional shooting, the shooting at the congressional baseball game. And they're like, well, should we hold people to account for the statement comments they've made that inspired the congressional baseball shooting? And it's like, number one, that's one incident. If you can find 2 or 3 more incidents that maybe fit in that pattern, we can talk about why that's similar. I don't think we should have to explain to anyone what the difference is between a bunch of powerful elected officials playing baseball and a bunch of, immigrants or racialized people getting their groceries at a Tops or a Walmart, or people going to a synagogue or a mosque. Yes, that's a big fucking difference when you talk about these two things. Number one. But yes, that is one incident. And when you talk about this spree of right-wing terrorist attacks, you're talking about now multiple incidents over several years with a very clear ideological connection and a very clear similarity in terms of the MO and the way these things happen. And I usually ignore Glenn, but I had to go in on this one. It's been such a fucking depressing endeavor watching Glenn kind of... You know what I realized about Glenn Greenwald as well? Is that I discovered Greenwald's writing in probably 2008, 2009 was hugely instrumental for me in helping me understand, Obama's foreign policy. What I realized about Glenn Greenwald, though, is that he's never been interested in foreign policy or, any of this stuff. What he's interested in is exposing liberal hypocrisy. That's all. And during the Obama administration, that took the form of talking about Obama's brutal foreign policy and exposing what the Obama administration was doing with whistleblowers, with its domestic spying operation, and that kind of stuff. He doesn't actually care, though, about drone strikes or imperialism or spying. What he cares about is owning libs, and that's all. And you can see how clear that is for the fact that he stopped covering drone warfare during the Trump administration, because then he couldn't use that to highlight liberal hypocrisy over. There was a really weird Bad Faith episode earlier with some almost self-awareness about the weird fascist-adjacent friends that they've been making. Well, yeah, now there's this whole Peter Thiel funded, by the way, Thiel, who also funds Glenn Greenwald, this whole Thiel funded New Right thing, right? Which is trying to which is just a tired rebrand of, it was the alt-right. It's every fucking couple years they rebrand. It's with all the exact same ideas. But now you have that going on, and with this kind of cool podcaster aesthetic. People also forget that Glenn supported the war in Afghanistan and wrote screeds about how awful Castro was years ago. Supported the Iraq war as well. Without looking. Oh, so now you care about ethnic pogroms, you tanky. I guess your friends Ken and Jordan will be walking back their tweets too. God damn it. It's like how Azov and other rightists in Ukraine have openly talked about using false flag events, including targeting civilians, and have a proven track record of successful ones achieving their goals of sparking conflict, but bring that up in the context of this current conflict, and you're a nutty conspiracy theorist and disgusting atrocity denier. I mean, it's just having a basic memory and a basic understanding of what these groups do. Right? It's just having a basic understanding. What do these groups do? They carry out horrible atrocities, and then use propaganda to try and use these atrocities that they've committed to destabilize the common enemy of the United States security state. Perhaps they're doing that right now. This same thing that they've been doing for decades and decades and decades. But no, when you ask that question, people get very upset. It would be so irritating if he wasn't so insistent that he was the sensible voice in the room, like when he defended the Roe v. Wade ruling on judicial precedent grounds. He knows exactly what he's doing. His arguments are so bad faith. It's very true. By the way, we should also talk about, briefly, we should definitely mention how this Buffalo shooter had a bunch of anti-trans bullshit in his manifesto as well. And the way that, the anti-trans shit has been given oxygen from people. The way that the anti-trans, the assault on trans rights that's coming from the highest levels of the conservative movement is completely, and the liberal movement, as we've seen elsewhere, is slides right into this deranged conspiratorial rhetoric about replacement and white genocide and all this shit. Why is everyone so fucking credulous? It's like we live in an adult daycare when no one knows where to be skeptical. I don't get it either, Lana. I don't know. This is why I come on here and yell about this stuff all day. Because like we were saying before, it makes you feel crazy. And you get insulted and called a genocide denier or an atrocity denier or a tanky or whatever for just being like having a basic understanding of history and similar events that have happened in the past and asking questions about whether these events are currently happening or whether these processes are currently going on, or whether we can trust these institutions that have repeatedly lied time and time again throughout the decades, which should be not controversial. This should not be controversial in any way. I don't follow the news on this outside of stuff. I don't follow the news on this outside of stuff in Discord. Did this guy get taken alive or not? Of course he did. Yeah, of course. Of course. He probably got a nice Burger King at the police station too while they were getting his confession. Always called a tanky and never a worm god. This is it. This is the problem. This is my cross to bear. My cross to bear. And I remember, I remember after the Tree of Life shooting also. All the same justification, right? It's all some variation. Like, in that case, the shooter was the thing that had been worked him up was like Soros. And like, it was basically framing everything as a Jewish conspiracy to open borders of the southern United States and bring immigrants into the United States to replace the white race or whatever. This is why when we were talking about Soros the other day and his very long established history of using these NGOs to destabilize governments in Ukraine and elsewhere and profiting immensely off the collapse of the Soviet Union. These are all very real things which we should criticize, but we also have to be careful because of the way that he's been used as this boogeyman for these far-right fascists, and he's the center of all these kinds of like extremely anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And before I have to go, I have to take a look at this fucking loser too. Where is this guy? Oh, I don't know if I saved it. I don't know if I saved the clip. Oh. If anyone can remember, there's this like Daily Wire guy who was going on afterwards about like, oh yeah, this is really terrible tragedy and everything, but they have a point. The Democrats really are opening the border and trying to replace us as well. So you had this weird rush of right-wing guys rather than trying to distance themselves from this fellow, this fucking murderer in Buffalo. And instead they logged on immediately and were like, yeah, this guy kind of has a point. There was a number of people doing this. And this guy was literally from South Africa. I'm sorry, and thanks Outrun for sharing this as well. I was trying to find that image of Tucker Carlson that was being shared on 4chan following this shooting. Like, they worship this guy. They idolize this guy. Like, then his direct words are contributing to this. And again, this is the tinfoil hat conspiracy zone stuff. When you talk about the domestic gladio and the ties to the intelligence community and that, but like MK Ultra, like we said, it's not the CIA contacting some guy and saying like, here's what you have to do. You got to go to the grocery store and you kill this person and this person. But like, what's more MK Ultra than a fucking former CIA reject going on the most watched news program every single night and saying this kind of stuff and encouraging people to carry out these kind of attacks through this kind of stochastic terrorism. What's more MK Ultra than that? Activating people that they know are going to be susceptible to this kind of thing. I don't know. Again, I don't want to go too far down the conspiracy rabbit hole with this, but I think there's some links which are worth asking questions about. Let me see if I can find this one last thing. Joel Pollack. Yeah, this is how sick these people are. These people are just open. They're openly the role or the normalization of fascism across the spectrum has been so fucking alarming. And now you have these guys that feel very comfortable in the wake of these mass shooting terrorist attacks. You have these guys now that feel perfectly comfortable logging onto Twitter and saying replacement theory would be less of a problem if it did not offer a compelling explanation of why Democrats are trying to open the southern border to as many migrants as possible and offer them a path to citizenship and voting. Note, no one ever provides a better explanation. Well, one thing, Joel, is that Democrats are not doing that.
To talk you through all this.
That's one of the main things, is that is not a thing that is happening. The idea that Democrats are opening the southern border. President Barack Obama literally deported more people than anyone in American history, any president in American history. And these guys are just openly comfortable talking about this. And this motherfucker, Joel Pollack, he's a Breitbart guy. Joel Pollack. Would you believe that this motherfucker is not from America, but he's from fucking South Africa?
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada.
Would you believe that Joel Pollack is from fucking South Africa? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious. Love.
You can count on me
to get
have
rated
Rob to,
by professional
all this.
diamond tier Twitch streamer Kira Chats. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kira Chats, for the raid. I appreciate it. And thank you, Disturbo, for the 7 months of tier 1. We love our Kira Chats. We do. It's true. Thank you. She is a bit of a loose cannon. That's true.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Mac10SC, thank you for the 6 months of tier 1 as well. Notorious woman supporter Rob. That's what they call me.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
That's what they call me. And thank you, Tyler Madsen, for the 2 gifted subs as well. I'm talking about this like right-wing shooting in Buffalo.
Count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Maverick, thanks for the gifted sub as well. Thank you, Maverick. I've just been talking about this shooting in Buffalo, how it fits in with the larger context of right-wing violence. You know, there's been a string of right-wing terrorist attacks over the last decade. It's an international movement, you know, very similar MO, very similar ideology. They're all inspiring each other and taking and you know, becoming heroes to these right-wing figures. And I was talking about the normalization of fascism in the West and how, you know, images like the Sonnenrad have been normalized so much over the last couple of weeks as part of this, the Russia-Ukraine invasion, and talking about how guys like this, like Joel Pollack, again, who is from South Africa. This man is not from America. He's a white South African American who now feels comfortable going online after these incidents take place and saying replacement theory would be less of a problem if it did not offer a compelling explanation of why Democrats are trying to open the southern border to as many migrants as possible and offer them a path to citizenship and voting. Note, no one ever provides a better explanation. Personally, if you ask me, after a horrific terrorist attack in which 10 people who were just innocent people going about their days shopping for groceries were brutally murdered by a person who believes this thing, personally, this is just me, I would not be logging on to twitter.com and being like, that guy kind of has a point. I kind of agree with that guy that did that. That's just me, though. I'm built different. And yes, this motherfucker is not even American. He's from South Africa. He's a white South African who feels very comfortable in the wake of this pogrom that took place, directly inspired. Again, this is a Breitbart editor, directly inspired by this guy's own friends and their rhetoric that they use, and feels very comfortable logging online and saying like, hey, he kind of has a point. Kind of has a point, that guy. What would you say if black South Africans talked about black replacement theory? Well, all these guys are obsessed with South Africa and white genocide in South Africa. They talk about it all the time. Of course he believes in the replacement his grandparents did in South Africa. That's exactly